All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. So I'm back again with another short, quick video focusing on one topic. This topic is dolmens in relation to the proposed theory of ancient giants once existing. So if you are, like everybody knows now, okay, if you go around the world and we're to go speak to the vast majority of pretty much any ancient culture, they would have legends of giants, and most of the time they all say that there were giants in the land before the people, that giants are older, and that giants were dying out when essentially people came around, right? So that's the general gist that we get looking around the world. And a lot of these megalithic structures, whether it be obelisks, menhirs, dolmens, Stonehenge, pyramids, temples, foundations, walkways, walls, all these various megalithic structures around the world, again, the native peoples, the native ancient cultures, the people will tend to say that it was the giants who built them. Okay, so that's just a fact. But in terms of science, science wouldn't say, "Oh, well, that's a scientific fact that proves giants," right? That's just hearsay. But it is people around the world all collectively saying essentially the same one thing and claiming that it was true. But if you don't want to use that as science, what could we use as science? Science likes to use what? Evidence. Some of the best evidence is physical evidence. So it's tangible evidence that you could see, anybody can see, millions of people can see, even touch and analyze at your whim. And there is physical evidence, in my opinion, and I have a logical argument for it, around the world that provides support for the proof of giants, that giants once existed. And this one thing that I'm focusing on here today, of all the different forms of megalithic structures and all of that around the earth, it's dolmens. So dolmens are quite peculiar and different and unique. Now they are crude. They're some of the more crude structures that could be built, but still takes a lot of thought and strength to build. Some of these dolmens are far more fantastic than the average dolmen. Like if you haven't done research on these things and you haven't seen the vast array of countless, it's pretty much countless dolmens in the world. Some of them are more complex, more grand, and larger, and just more jaw dropping and awe inspiring than the average dolmen that you might picture. Some dolmens are really large and extremely using extremely heavy stones. So but dolmens are an enigma. Okay, that's the interesting thing because, long story short, and I'll read a little bit of excerpts here from some articles on dolmens. Right, for those of you who don't know, the reason I'm here today making a video about dolmens saying that they're some of the greatest proof for giants is because of the following enigmas. Dolmens are some of the oldest structures on the planet. Okay, number one, a lot of people don't know that. Even I didn't know that, and I knew a lot of stuff about them. But when I did all, the fact checking, the research, I was pretty impressed and shocked to learn that the dolmens are some of the oldest structures on the planet, and they're very, very mysterious. So I'll go and read the article real quickly. But I was also shocked to learn just how many there are in the world. I mean, it's ridiculous how many dolmens are, and they're on every inhabited continent: North America, South America, Europe. In some places more than others, right? But North and South America, Europe, all throughout Europe, Russia, okay, and all parts of Asia, Upper Asia, Central Asia, Far East, Lower Asia, Middle East, India, Oceanic Islands, Africa. It's all got the same things, right? All got legends about giants, and they all have dolmens, all the different inhabited continents. Now, a point that I made once before, which bears relevance here today, is it's a very strange and enigmatic thing that must have a logical solution to it. But the enigma is obviously there was at least one race of, well, we'll give it that they're probably humanoids, right? Of large humans or humanoids on the planet. Sorry, or at least humans or humanoids on the planet, right? Because I'm not here to say that they're creatures or something, right? They had a group of humans had to exist on the planet. It had to be a culture, it had to be a civilization, and it had to be, um, I would say, advanced only in the terms that for their time they were able to go around the world. Because this culture, whatever it was, obviously had a global influence. Okay, either it had a global presence or a global influence. Those are logical. That's science. Science goes by common sense, logic, and wisdom and intelligence, right? You can't argue that, right? If we see these dolmens as one example all around the world, then it clearly shows you that at least one culture back then either had a global presence or a global influence. They didn't have to live everywhere around the world or populate around the world, but they could have visited around the world and maybe left impressions on people or built things in different places and then left. But a culture like that had to exist. Whether they're giants or regular sized people is another matter. But that is one thing that we can ascertain looking at the physical evidence that is around the world, which is these dolmens. Something like that had to exist. However, then we have a conundrum because that, which is the logical and only viable solution, unless you want to say aliens come down around the world back in ancient times, build dolmens, which is ridiculous, right? So it had to be a culture doing it around the world. But that doesn't fit with what people claim about history on this planet. Okay, because there was, if you look in any history book, even with all the latest updates and stuff, they are not teaching that there was some type of global influence or global presence culture really far back in time, like whatever that would be, like Neolithic or whatever, right? No, there's nothing like that. What science tries to push is something like out of Africa theory. There's been evidence against that recently, anyways. That's why I said something like out of Africa theory. But, you know, science assumes we came from one spot on the planet and then spread out. And then I'm assuming most people know the general gist of that theory, but maybe most people don't. But going with the out of Africa theory, it says that everybody originated there. So everybody was there for a very long time. And at some point, whatever it was, hundreds of thousands of years ago or a million years ago, I don't know offhand. But some of us migrated out. Those who stayed in Africa became everybody who's in Africa now. Those who went out and I guess went up north towards Europe became the Europeans, and then those who went elsewhere became each to their own, right? And everybody, some pockets went out further and populated like the Oceanic Islands and all of that there, right? So that's the general gist of what they claim is the case. But that in old known history and archaeology does not support the idea of a global a global culture that had a global presence or influence, especially in those such ancient times. That's not the case. But when we look at the dolmens, which are physical, actual evidence, and there's thousands, tens of thousands of them around the world, it's an undeniable. Even if not all of them are ancient, I mean, some of those were probably built more recently. Don't get me wrong, but out of the tens of thousands of examples of dolmens, there are undeniably thousands of ancient dolmens. Okay, and who was building them or influencing their style in building around the world? How would that be possible for little unadvanced peoples at the time who are still migrating through the earth and learning the most fundamental basic things about the earth and reality? Like science didn't come until a lot later, right? Where did this knowledge of how to move big rocks, cut, shape, and move big, even though dolmens aren't typically shaped and all of that, right? Some of them have a general shape, like um, they're not like big, round, lumpy, rough rocks. You know what I mean? They're flat ones. But anyways, right? For dolmens, you're still sourcing them somewhere, harvesting them. You know, however that is done. Maybe they're already loose chunks. Maybe you cut them, break them loose. Whatever, it doesn't matter, right? You're sourcing them. You're harvesting them. You're transporting them. Maybe some cut, shaping, but then you're positioning them. You're lifting them and positioning them, and all of this effort. And somebody is doing this around the world. And all the dolmens, virtually all of them, obviously, nobody can look at them and think that they're different, that they're unrelated, that it's just a big coincidence. These dolmens clearly have a connecting web of, underlying influence and style. It's undeniable. Okay, all these fancy archaeologists and science, they look at pottery fragments, designs on pottery, and they say, oh, this culture must have been influenced by that culture because it's so similar, and blah, blah, blah. Right? So, and it's true, right? Don't get me wrong. But that's the same thing here. When we're talking about a style of building, especially the more ancient you go, there is less development like that, right? Like technological development, even if it was so fundamental, and less civilization back then, the further back you go. So if you're going that far back to when the dolmens were built. Okay, and the dolmen builders were able to source and transport and lift and position all these stones, and they're doing it around the world. This shows you something that is nothing short of an enigma, right? So if we look at some quick factoids about dolmens here. Okay, so right from good old Wikipedia, it says that it remains unclear why and by whom the earliest dolmens were made. Okay, the oldest known are found in Western Europe, dating from 7,000 years ago. Archaeologists still do not know who erected these dolmens, which makes it difficult to know why they did it. They are They are generally all regarded as tombs or burial chambers, despite the absence of clear evidence for this. Human remains, sometimes accompanied by artifacts, have been found in or close to the dolmens, which could be scientifically dated using radiocarbon dating. However, it has been impossible to prove that these remains date from the time when the stones were originally set in place. So that's just dolmens in general. And we can see right there. And I know some people say, oh, Wikipedia, anybody, you cannot just write anything on Wikipedia. Okay. And, that one there, it said a note of dubious, check, whatever it is. I did some background research because of that. I was like, okay, fine. I know it's Wikipedia. It's not necessarily 100% correct, but Wikipedia is pretty good. Don't bash it. I'll give it a high 90s in terms of accuracy. Everything's got to be cited in order to submit an entry to Wikipedia. Nonetheless, right? So I went and did some fact checking. I did some countries for examples, like megaliths in Europe, in various different countries. Okay, and like Sardinia and Britain and France and this and that there. And I did some research. I went back into human archaeology, archaeology of ancient humans from these different periods. I learned all these different groups of people I never knew existed, and all these periods of time, one after the other. I went through all of that there, but I didn't see anything anywhere in everything that I read that, any actual evidence, like legitimately, there was nothing anywhere that said that, oh, this culture built the dolmens, because there's nothing anywhere. Okay, so I think it's still fair what the Wikipedia entry says there, right? But dolmens are mysterious, and maybe some dolmens in the world do have an explanation because they were built by people, and there's record and claim to it. But like I've said before, with other megalithic monuments, but I'm focusing on dolmens here, right? But it applies to other megalithic, ancient, mysterious monuments from around the world, or megalithic monuments around the world, is in the vast majority of cases, and in virtually all the cases of dolmens, there's no claim or record of humans creating them, right? There's no any form of claim, whether oral tradition, written in tradition, inscribed tradition, anything like that there. You just don't see it in the vast majority of cases. Okay, specifically with dolmens here, that is just true. So you can go fact check Wikipedia all you want, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of dolmens, nobody knows who built them. Yeah, there were tribes of people, of humans, who lived in the lands at that time, but most of the time, all they know about these tribes are a few fragments of pottery or poultry, things like that there. It's not like, oh, they found the whole city of the people back then, and in a time machine, and they could see everybody and what they look like, and they know everything about them. No, this is like they find some pottery, maybe some beads. Oh, okay, there must have been a culture here. And then they compare the patterns on the beads and the pottery. This is what all these archaeologists do, right? So yeah, there are peoples in the lands back then. We're talking about giants as well as people in the lands. Okay, so what's the next thing here? What I found astonishing was just how many dolmens there are. So in Korea, which surprised me, and the dolmens in Korea look identical to the dolmens in Europe and the dolmens everywhere else. The dolmens in Korea, how many dolmens do you think are in Korea? I was shocked. Okay, about 40,000 dolmens. 40,000 dolmens. Now, no scientist could tell me that, oh, dolmens are just an irrelevant stone structure when you got 40,000 of them built in one country alone. And they're present on every inhabited continent. And they're mysterious, and people don't really know any claim or record of who built them. And you got 40,000 in one country alone. Don't tell me that dolmens aren't some enigma. Okay? Now, and what humans? Like I said, if it was us humans who built them, where is the claim? Where is the record? And how is it possible for humans to have a global presence or influence at such a time to produce these global dolmens. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, anyways, right? So, how about the Middle East? How many are in the Middle East? Doesn't say how many here. In Europe, Europe has thousands. Oh, list of dolmens. Maybe I have to go to this article here. There's thousands in Europe, right? I mean, there's tens of thousands of dolmens in the world. You got 40,000 in Korea alone. Okay, but you got thousands in Europe. You got numerous ones everywhere else. Each place is different. Some have less, some have more, right? But there you go, right? So unless I can see another number in this article here, right? But let's read this one in list of dolmens, right? It says 40% of the world's dolmens are found in Korea. So let's do some quick mental math. We got 40,000 dolmens, and that's 40%. That's 100,000 dolmens. Is that correct? That's a lot. Holy moly. That's a lot more than I thought. So 100,000 dolmens in the world. And, these are incomplete lists. That's not all of them, right? There's probably a lot more. There's probably buried ones. These are just ones they know about. 100,000 dolmens, right? So dolmen sites under a list of dolmens. We have Asia here, right? So in the Caucasus region alone, over 3,000 dolmens in the Caucasus region. Okay, in China, there's a large group of dolmens along the Huifa River, and I'm gonna screw up all these names. I just know it. But totaling more than 80, right? So less in China, but still pretty interesting. India, they got dolmens in India. Okay, they got a lot of examples here. I don't know how many, but I'm just scrolling down for time. Korea, we just went through that there. About 40,000 in Korea. Middle East and Iran, does it say how many in there? That might be a place where there might be less dolmens. But in all the photo examples of these dolmens from these countries, they all look identical, all exactly the same. When you're talking about building, some people might be like narrow-minded and say, "Well, a dolmen is a simple structure. Of course, you'd see it around the world." I mean, like how? No, 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 no. No, don't try to spoon feed me that nonsense. Like I'm not taking that dopey formula. Oh no, 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 no. Right? There's a million ways you could build things. There's a million shapes, a million different things and structures you could make. And don't you dare come to me and tell me that dolmens are so simple that you should expect to see them around the world. There's no enigma. No, that's ridiculous. Right? If you're talking about building a wall, for heaven's sake, there's a ton of different ways you can build a wall. Okay, the type of rock, the shape of the rock, the way they fit, the way they're stacked, how thick it is, how tall it is, and all this and that there, right? There's tons of different ways, how they're put together and jointed, and do you use mortar, do you not use mortar, right? Are there connector rods? There's a whole sort of different things, right? Just with walls, boring old walls. Wall is just a straight line. How complicated could a wall be? What about the wall foundations? What about the wall reinforcements or buttresses? What about wall pillars? There's all these different aspects, just the boring old walls. And you get into complex structures like a temple, right? Even if it's a square temple, do you know how different? If you ask 1,000 people to design a square temple, they'd all make different looking temples. Well, some of them would be similar, but you know what I mean. You get all different looking types, right? So don't tell me that we have all these dolmens around the world, 100,000 dolmens in the world, because, oh, it's just a simple shape. No, they're not. Okay, no, no, no. And on top of that, are they simple to build? No. So someone across the world is making all this effort to lift these heavy blanking rocks and stack them in these simple shapes, right? I don't buy that. If they're little rocks, then maybe, yeah, some primitive people are just like, oh, I'm going to stack rocks one day, and just leave it, right? And 100,000 of them apparently. But if they're normal size, then maybe. But you're not fooling around with rocks when the rocks weigh like 100 tons. No, no, no. That takes a need, a want, and an intent. You have to premeditate what you want to do and how you're going to do it to pull it off. This astronomical feat, something so heavy, and you're so primitive back then. Oh no, no. I don't want to hear anybody try. You know what I mean? Say that dolmens are a simple structure. No, they're not. But all these dolmens around the world, they look the same. Okay, they all look the same, and that's pretty astonishing. So, going down to Africa here, for example, in Somalia, there's dolmens, burial mounds, menhirs, which are standing stones, and stelae. North Africa, in In Africa, there's some as well. Probably not thousands or whatnot, but there's some in Africa. In Europe, where's the number for Europe? Um, I think without quite. I mean, everybody knows Europe is full of dolmens. I mean, take your pick. Every European country you can think of has dolmens, like Ireland, um, probably even Scotland, right? Anything you look up is going to have dolmens somewhere. Even Iceland, everything has dolmens. Even Greenland and the native, the upper regions of Canada, they're natives. There's dolmens. And who built them? You ask the natives. Oh, the giants built them. Every blinking place that's inhabited in the world, they got these ancient dolmens. Okay, and nobody knows who built them. And all the locals say that the giants built them, but you got science trying to say, oh, well, no. Well, then what is science to say? Who built them? If it wasn't giants, then it was people. And if it was people, then that means that these people had a global influence and presence. But that goes right against everything that archaeology and science wants us to believe. So, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You got to take your pick. It was either giants who built them or this, conspiracy level theory of a ancient race of man who pioneered around the world. They're advanced enough to pioneer around the world, but yet they only built dolmens. That's less. If you're just to compare the two options, giants, just big people, maybe they're only 10 feet tall, nothing exceptional, right? You got giants, or pretty much a legendary race of peoples who went around the world and influenced everybody back then to build dolmens, or they went everywhere and built dolmens everywhere. Out of the two, which is more realistic and plausible? Okay, you know what I mean? It's actually more plausible that just big people built them than that the big people were just an archaic branch of humankind, essentially. Very, very archaic, and they had a global type presence. Maybe they're some of the first to come out of Africa, you know what I mean, so to speak. However, the origins of everything worked. Um, but, anyways, that's my point. So, dolmens are great physical, tangible evidence of something built them. 100,000 of them around the world. So, like I said, take your pick. It's either regular sized people or big people. You don't want to believe big people built it, then you're saying that there's some legendary race of people out there, a culture of people way back then who are somehow traveling around the world to all the continents, you know what I mean? And making dolmens everywhere. A little bit ridiculous, don't you think? That if you could travel the world, that instead of making civilizations and spreading your culture everywhere, because there is no physical culture that went around the world unless you believe in Atlantis, right? And Atlantis didn't go around to all the inhabited continents. It just went around some of the nearby countries, right? Where was I going with this again? So yeah, I shouldn't sidetrack like that there. But anyways, I think everybody gets the gist of what I was trying to say. So it's not realistic to think that you would have this ancient legendary culture that went around the world, kind of like Atlantis, building dolmens everywhere. There we go. My point was, if you had the ability back, you are so advanced above all the other ancient peoples that you could build boats, you could travel the world, but instead of building cultures and things, what do you build? Little dolmens, little crude dolmens. Oh wow, you know what I mean? Like wow. If they went around the world and were building pyramids, like Giza pyramids everywhere, well, that would be like Atlantis. You know what I mean? But at that level there, that Atlantean type level, there would be no question. But we don't see that. So out of the two options, big people, aka giants, regular sized people, which would imply a legendary culture that went around the world, which would require boat technology at least, right? Which is more plausible. I'm sorry, but it's big people. There's more evidence, and there's less evidence required for big people, but there's more evidence from what we have for big people doing it based on the size of the rocks themselves and the very fact that there is no evidence that human-sized culture ever did that. I mean, we have so much evidence about ancient humans and this and that there. There's just no evidence in all these other countries that ancient human culture went around the world doing that. There's no evidence in all the different countries you look. There's no evidence. So there's no evidence in the whole world for that. Like it would be a legend. It would be like Atlantean legend applied to the whole planet, right? There's nothing for that. There's no evidence for that. So it's less plausible. It's more plausible there was just an archaic race of humans that were twice as big as us. Okay, and that they were somehow, maybe because they're bigger, they can move around easier. Maybe they could cross certain more shallow bodies of water easier. I don't know, but that's far more plausible. Okay, and these giants didn't develop giant cultures and civilizations and cities and technologies and all that. On the vast whole, giants are very primitive and reclusive. You know what I mean? They're very, very crude and generally barbaric. So building dolmens would be right up a giant's alley. What would a giant build a dolmen for? Well, there could be a multitude of things. You could build a dolmen and sit on it. There you go. Nice little lazy boy couch. The first lazy boy couch dolmen built by giants, right? Build that little thing, sit on it. You know, maybe you caught a few cows, you stuffed a few cows underneath the little chair part underneath, right? Maybe you got some logs or some round rocks and you pile up the front and trap them underneath, right? Maybe you got something like that going on, or it's your little place you sit off and you watch the sunset or you look at the stars. Stonehenge could be a little seating arrangement for giants. There's a million things that dolmens could have been used for. Some dolmens in different countries look like stone boxes with little holes. I've long said, unfortunately, that could be a lunchbox for giants. Giants might build that, put a little hole in it, get a tree trunk, break the tree, crunch, right? Have a little plug of tree, or chop it, depending how big the giant is. But you get my point. You build this little stone structure with a little tiny hole in it, get a tree trunk like a cork, get your people that you catch out there, stuff them into the little hole, boink, 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 push the people in, put the cork in. People are trapped inside, or whatever other animals, you know what I mean? And just go off hunting again, come back, put them in there, and then there your food's all in one lunchbox. So, I mean, you tell me, what are dolmens for? I mean, nothing else makes sense. They weren't homes. There's no evidence that these dolmens were homes. Most of them structurally it's not even logical to think that they would be homes. Okay? So people think that, oh, they had religious significance. Well, if dolmens were religious, that means that there was a global culture of either giants or humans. Okay? So, but there's no real evidence. And what evidence could you have besides speculation that they were religious? Okay? Maybe they're monuments, maybe they're landmarkers. Okay? That's possible, right? That's what I think they could serve as one of their functions. And the other thing is, science likes to say, oh, they're just tombs for ancient humans. But there's no evidence for this. There's no actual evidence for this. Just like the Wikipedia article says, yeah, sometimes human remains are found around dolmens. Okay? But there's no actual evidence that dolmens, like there might be some that are tombs, don't get me wrong, but out of the 100,000 dolmens in the planet Earth, the vast majority of dolmens are not tombs. Any excavation or land scans, LIDAR, whatever you call it, will not show any underground tombs because they are not tombs. The vast majority of them. So what are they for? And who built them around the world? Okay, in those ancient times. It's far more plausible those big people, twice our size. They're very crude, maybe very simple-minded. God bless them. You know what I mean? And that's what they did in their pastimes. Okay, and we're just focusing on dolmens here. I'm not getting into anything else megalithic, right? And that's what they did. Maybe the more intelligent ones built the fancy-looking pyramids that are so similar around the world, and the walls. Maybe there were a few cities and civilizations of not civilizations, but you know what I mean? Maybe there were some. The Bible says there were. Okay, like the cities of the Anakim. Okay, and I'm not sure what country it's in, but it's called the Wall of Arwad, and it's been renamed since, supposedly. Go check out pictures of that wall. The blocks of that wall are like bigger than buses. Like, it's ridiculous. Okay, so who built all these things? It's far more plausible that giants did it. Anyways, then we have to look at, and that's not for this video, but what I end on is, you know, if it's more plausible that giants built it, then where's the evidence for giants existing? Well, what counts as evidence? Physical evidence. Well, if giants built I know it's a catch, but if giants built the dolmens, then dolmens are evidence that the giants existed because they would be things that the giants built. Okay? We don't have any ancient Egyptians walking around in the temples when we unearth them. Okay? Like when they find all those tombs and temples buried under the sand, and the Sphinx under the sand. It's not like they dug out the sand and ancient Egyptians popped out. Oh, hey, how are you? No. Okay? Those things are buried under sand, long forgotten. Okay, just like anything else could be with the giants out there as well. And that's what people have to understand. It's not fair to say that they could not have existed because we don't have any evidence of them. Anyways, I'm going off track and blah blah blah. Take care, folks.